Welcome to lesson 407. Today we're going to be talking about percents and decimals. So last lesson we were moving from fractions to percents, and this time we're going to go from percents and to decimals and decimals to percents. So basically we're just changing these numbers into different forms, but it's the same thing. So sometimes we have to play around with things and know how to change numbers back and forth so that we can actually apply them into real situations. So let's go ahead and look at how to go from a percent to a decimal. There are two different ways you can do it. Now, in examples, I'm going to do both ways. So basically, I want you to look at both ways and see which one do you think is going to be most easy for you. Because you're going to be the one solving them, and so you should have a choice and choose which one is easier for you. So way number one, you start with your percent. Then you are going to change your percent to a fraction because you know every percent is that number over 100. So basically, 7% is now going to turn into 7 hundredths. And then you remember how we go from fractions or from fractions to decimals? We read them. So 7 hundredths, and then you would go ahead and write 7 in the hundredths place. So 0.07. So that would be the first way. And it's pretty simple. It's not too difficult. The second way is the way kind of I always do it, so your preference. So I start with 7%, and then I know that I need to move my decimal to be able to make my decimal number. So if you anytime you have a number, a percent, a lot of times either it'll show you a decimal in the number, or if it doesn't, then the decimal is automatically at the end. So you would take that decimal and you'll move it 2 places to the left, and then you'll have your new decimal, which is 0.07 or 7 hundredths. So you're going to get the same answer either way. So whether you just want to move the decimal 2 places or turn it to a fraction then a decimal is up to you. Okay, now let's go ahead and look at how to go from a decimal to a percent. So there's also 2 ways for that one as well. So way number one, you start with your decimal, 0.4 or 4 tenths. And then you go ahead and put it in fraction form. So kind of like these fractions are connecting this right here. So we start with 4 tenths, then we write it as 4 tenths. And just like we did in the last lesson, we want to get the denominator equal to 100 because as we know, percents are a part of 100, just like your grades are a part of 100. So we want to get 100 at the denominator, so we just multiply 10 by 10, and that will give us 100 in our denominator. So we now have 40 over 100, which means that it's 40% out of 100. So 40%. The second way is also with moving decimals, like we did up here in the second way up here. Instead of moving our decimal to the left 2 places, we're going to move it to the right 2 places. So if you want to think of going to a decimal, move 2 places to the left, going to a percent, 2 places to the right, that might be an easy way to be able to connect it for you. So these two might be easier for you to use together. Alright, so you'd start with your decimal, 0.4, 4 tenths. Then you would just move your decimal 2 places to the right, and you'd be left with 40%. So either way you're going to get the same answer, it's up to you. Let's go ahead and do some examples. Alright, let's go ahead and do our examples 2 different ways. So this first example, we're going from a percent to a decimal. So let's go ahead and do way number one. This way had to do with fractions. So we have 68%. So we have 68% here. Now we're going to go ahead and put it in fraction form. So it's going to be 68 over 100 because all percents are over 100 because it's a part of 100. And then we are going to write it in decimal form. So if we read the fraction 68 hundredths, we're going to write it as such. So the 68 would end in the hundredths place, which is the second place value after the decimal. Alright, so then this would be your answer. So let's go ahead and do it the second way now. We start with 68%. Then we have to move our decimal. Now when we're going from a percent to a decimal, we move it 2 places to the left. So let's go to 2, and we're going to move our decimal place from over here to 2 places to the left, and now it's going to be here. And you'll see how we get the same answer, 68 hundredths. Alright, let's go ahead and do number 2. We're starting with 5%, and we want to go to that in decimal form. So way number 1 has to do with fractions. So we'll start with 5%, and then we are going to go ahead and write 5% over 100 because percent's a part of 100. So 5 over 100, And then we are going to read it 5/100ths and write it as such. So let's write it as 0.05. We have to make sure 5 ends in the hundredths place, which is the second place value after the decimal. So there's your answer, 0.05, or you can read it as 5/100ths. And then way number 2 has to do with moving the decimal. So we're going to start with 5%. We're going to move our decimal 2 places to the left. So we're going to go 1, 2. We'll have to add a placeholder here, a 0. And our new decimal is 0.05 or 5/100ths, which is this. All right, let's go ahead and look at number 3. In this case, we have 27 6/10, and it's in percent form. So just because you see a decimal doesn't mean it's in decimal form, because this symbol just shows you that's in a percent. So anytime you have a percent that has a decimal in it already, then it might just be easier for you just to move it 2 places to the left. So that's what I'm going to do this time. So I have 27 6/10, and I'm just going to go ahead and move this 2 places to the left. And then now our new decimal, so we're going from percents to decimal, our decimal is going to be 276 thousandths. So that might just be a little bit easier in this case. All right, let's go ahead and look at example number 4. This time we are going to be moving from decimals to percents. So let's go ahead and do it both ways. Way number 1, we want to read it. We have 9/100ths. So we're going to go ahead and write it as 9/100ths. And since our fraction already has a 100 in the denominator, we know that this is our percent. So in this case, it is 9%. Okay, we can also do it way number 2 that has to do with moving decimals. So we can start with 9/100ths, take our decimal, move it 2 places to the right, because you remember when we're going from decimals to percents, we go to the right. So think of it, you're moving towards the percent sign. And then whenever you are going from percent to decimal, think you're moving it away from the percent sign. So it's like it's not going to be a percent. This time we're thinking we want a percent sign. Okay? So we have, now after you move that 2 places to the right, we will see that we will get 9%, because our decimal falls right after the 9, which makes it 9%. All right, let's go ahead and look at number 5. We have 3/10 or 0.3. So we need to go ahead and change this from a decimal to a percent. So let's go ahead and first read our decimal, 3/10. So now let's go ahead and write it in that form. So we have 3/10. So let's go ahead now, and we have to remember, when we're going from a fraction to a percent, we want a 100 in the denominator. So this is just like what we did last lesson. So let's go ahead and multiply by 10, because 10 by 10 is going to give us 100. So now we have 30 over 100, which tells us, once we have 100 in the denominator, that this is our percent. So our percent is 30. So 30% is our answer. All right, let's go ahead and do it the second way, where we just move our decimal place. So we're going to start with 0.3 or 3/10. And now let's think. We are going to move right, because that is where our percent sign is going to go. So we're going to go 2 places that way. 1, 2. So now that our decimal place is behind our whole number, it's going to be 30%, just like what we have up here. All right, let's go ahead and look at the last problem. It's number 6, and we have 73/100ths. So let's go ahead and do it both ways, with fractions and with moving our decimal. So let's go ahead and start with way 1. We have our decimal, 73/100ths. Now we need to go ahead and write that in fraction form. So we have 73/100ths. And in this case, we already have 100 in the denominator, so we don't have to do anything to the fraction. We just have to go ahead and put it in percent form now. So we know that it is 73%. All right. And way number 2 has to do with moving our decimal place left or right. So let's go ahead and start with our decimal, 73/100ths. And remember, we're going to move our decimal to the right 2 places, because we want to get our percent sign. So we're going towards the percent sign. We're going to go 1, 2 places to the right. And so now we have 73%. All right. As always, go ahead and rewind the video if you have some questions. Also, you can go into your textbook and look at more examples. And please bring your questions if you still have some tomorrow, and we'll answer those. Let's go ahead and do some on your own questions.
Alright, we have 4 problems to do. The first 2 problems just go from a percent to a decimal, and then the last 2 problems go from a decimal to percent. Good luck, we'll see what you get tomorrow.